All right. Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome back to another future-focused weekly update. I'm Christopher Lind, your host, and if I'm doing my job well, I am hopefully keeping you 10 steps ahead of what is happening at the intersection of business, tech, and the human experience. I've got my usual rundown of some of the latest things happening and some of my thoughts related to them to hopefully give you some perspective on how to process all this stuff. But first of all, thanks to everybody who's watching, following, sharing the content, wherever you're consuming it from. If you are one of those, thanks for following along with the journey. And please share with a friend. Do all the social things that you're supposed to do, like, subscribe, follow, hit the notification bell, whatever it is that you can do on the platform you're consuming it from. So I've got kind of a diverse mix this week of some different topics, some related to employability and skills and kind of the job market, some related to higher education and academia. And then, as usual, I've got to include some of the stuff coming out on AI right now for people to process through. So let's get into that. But one of the first things, before we get to number one, I just have to say, I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, when Shopify dropped its whole, we're AI first, we're all going to be including AI into hiring and everything. We're going to be doing all this stuff. We're only going to consider new headcount and job recs if this and that. And I said, just wait. This is just now going to become the pop trend. You're going to see popping off everywhere. And wouldn't you know it, this week, Duolingo, their CEO, sent out an email, and I read through the actual message itself, and almost verbatim, the exact same talking points. I'm not saying I see the future. I'm just saying when you start to see trends long enough, you start to go, yeah, I know where this is going. So don't be surprised if you're an employee and you suddenly start, or a leader or whatever. If you're in a company, just don't be surprised when you get an email from the CEO saying, we're an AI first company. We're freezing all headcount. We will be evaluating this. We are not hiring contractors until further notice, all this other stuff. Just get ready for it. And be prepared is all I'm going to say. I might talk about that more next week. We'll see. But since I just talked about it, I didn't want to repeat it. But I just thought it was entertaining as I checked my news feed this week and I was like, oh, hey, what do you know? Another one that's doing it verbatim, exactly the same. So get ready for this playbook to be run on repeat. And I guess my one piece of real quick advice, and then I'll get into my usual four, is if you're a business leader, just be careful about these pop trends, because I understand it's like where things are going, but I'm telling you right now, there's a lot more behind the scenes that people are not considering, and people are making a lot of mistakes right now. So just please do it thoughtfully. Okay. Please. Okay. Anyway, like I said, I'll come back to that another time. I've got some more interesting things that I wanted to talk through today, but I had to call attention to it because I got to chuckle, not like ha 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 ha, but just like, oh boy, here we go again. So anyway, all right, let me move into number one. So the first one was, there was this whole slew of articles that I started seeing pop off all over the place about, reasoning models don't always say what they think. The AI is lying to us. I mean, you can pretty much think of nefarious AI as deceiving executives everywhere. I mean, if you just want a clickbait article, there's no shortage of them. And a lot of it is coming off of some Anthropic research that recently came out. Okay. And so I wanted to talk about what that Anthropic research says, what it means, what it looks like, all this stuff, because ultimately it's important to understand what it is, because it is what it seems, but it's also not quite. Now, if you want to go actually look at the research, it's 18 pages. It's fairly consumable, but it's called Reasoning Models Don't Always Say What They Think. Okay. So the title of the research itself is rather clickbaity in and of itself, but it came out of Anthropic. And if you want to go dig into all the specifics and the details and how they ran the tests and all this other stuff, you can go look at all that stuff. My goal is to break down some of the biggest highlights of it to help you understand what this all means and to see what some of these takeaways are and how we should be thinking about this. Because what I can tell you is my take on what we're seeing here is, we're not going to fix this. So if the goal is how do we correct this, We don't, in my opinion. Now, there might be people who think we will. I will vehemently argue against them at any point. I don't think we will. So it's more a matter of, okay, if this is what AI does and how it operates, then how do we work alongside it knowing these things? Now, I think it's really important that I'm going to break down some terminology that I'm going to use so that you understand. And if you were to go look at the research, you'd understand what it's talking about. So let me just do a little bit of like education context setting first. A lot of what it's talking about is its COT, or its chain of thought. Now, you may have seen this if you use AI models, but when you ask it to do things, certain models, or if you put it in a certain mode, it will actually show you what looks like high-speed credits that if you were to go back and look at it, you would see like this is its reasoning. This is its thinking if you were to translate its thinking on demand. And it's an effort to undo the black box, to remove the curtain from the black box and help us peer into the AI model and see how it thinks. So when you hear things like chain of thought monitoring, COT, things like that in the AI space, just understand that's what they're referring to. This transparent reasoning that's supposed to be explainable AI, XAI type of a thing that helps you understand what the AI is doing. Okay. So that's one term that you're going to hear a lot. Now, something else that comes up in this research a lot is its reinforcement learning methodology. So does it use a human feedback methodology? I can't remember the exact term for it. It's like RLHF. If you see RLHF, reinforcement learning, human feedback. This is the traditional approach that a lot of AI is trained on. You have to remember, AI doesn't just, yes, it does reinforcement learning and all this stuff, but there is a human assessment that helps then reinforce it. And one of the ways it often is done is humans tell it, yeah, I like what you gave me, what you return. And you see this even in the old models that you do yourself. If you go type something into ChatGPT or whatever model, sometimes you'll see it'll give you two different versions and it'll say, which one do you prefer? Or down at the bottom of each one, it'll give you a little thumbs up, like, was that a good response type of a thing. Now that's post the model being trained, but that same kind of process happens when they're actually training the models. And so there's two big ways of doing that. One is the human feedback reinforcement. One is outcome based, where it's just, did you get to the right answer? We don't really care how you got there. Human feedback is looking more throughout, did I like what you did? Did I like the way you went through it? We're evaluating all those things. So you're going to see it talk about some of those things. And then another term that I say a lot, or I see, thrown around a lot, that a lot of people are like, they nod, but they don't really know what it's talking about. You'll hear the term reward hacking. And what that means is when the AI finds a way to cheat the system. A good example of this would be like, let's say you tell it to do something, but somehow there's an unencrypted file that actually has the solution to what it is. And it figures out, well, if I just do this, I get the right answer all the time anyway, and you can basically hack the system. That's reward hacking. And a good example, I think I talked about this months ago, was a video game where a boat, was supposed to drive itself around. And it found out that if it actually glitched through this thing, it could do it a lot faster. And so it just started doing that all the time because it went, well, this is actually getting me the same reward, but I don't have to skip all these steps, right? It's like cheating in some ways. So that's what reward hacking is. So if you go look at the report, you're going to see those terms thrown around a lot. And this is what it's getting into when it says you can't trust it. It doesn't always say what it thinks. Well, what they're really talking about is this chain of thought, this reasoning that it's supposed to be supposedly telling you how it thinks. And when they dug into it, the accuracy of it was extremely poor, like less than 20%. I mean, there's a bunch of different mentions of it, but let's just say it's not in the high end of things. So as you can imagine, you can now see why it's not always saying accurately how they think. Well, yeah, the data proves that. So if you were to actually try and understand how did you come to that conclusion, and you were to look at the chain of thought, it wouldn't be improved, like it wouldn't actually be there. Now that's extremely problematic when you start to think about, okay, well, if we're starting to move towards handing over AI more and more and more of our decisions, and we now have to audit it, we now have to understand, well, why did it draw the conclusion it did? If less than 20% of the time, the reasons that it's giving us are not accurate, well, that suddenly becomes majorly problematic for anything that requires any sort of audit trail, requires any sort of follow-up. If something breaks and you want to go back and actually try and understand, well, wait, how did you come to that conclusion? You're not really going to be able to figure it out because it's not going to be accurate. And where it gets compounds is the human feedback approach, which is often how AI models are trained versus just the outcome-based, is actually even more problematic, which at first glance you would go, that doesn't make any sense. If you have humans sitting here giving it feedback all the time, wouldn't its reasoning be better? Wouldn't it be more accurate in what it does than if you just say, just get to the goal, I don't care how you do it, just get there? Actually, no. And as you dug into some of this stuff, one of the things that was really interesting about why, and it actually makes sense, is that we like to think we're objective and unbiased, and we see things clearly, but we don't. And so when AI is actually trained on us saying, this is what good looks like, thumbs up, thumbs down, no, I don't like it that way, it actually learns, and I've said this multiple times in the past, it actually almost learns how to tell you what you want to hear rather than the truth, because it just is continually being reinforced by this human feedback learning that, oh, people like this, people like that, they want to hear this, they like it phrased this way. So what you'll see in these, and they saw this in the research, was some of these human feedback trained models and environments, it gave much more impressive answers. If you were to read, well, but now how did you come to that conclusion? Or you were to look at the reasoning, it would seem very well polished. It would be very, you would just be like, wow, that looks good to me. I'm going to take that for what it is, except it's not right. It's not accurate because ultimately that's not what people want. People don't want the messy, real answers. They want what makes them feel better about things. Now, again, you can kind of see, well, that's kind of problematic because if we're supposed to have humans in the loop, but we also are finding that human reinforced AI is actually worse in terms of being more deceptive and more incomplete in explaining its reasoning, isn't human in the loop a bad thing? No. Just to be crystal clear on this. Now, going, back to the other one where it's like, oh, outcome-based was so much better, right? So if we just said, just go do it, don't care how you get there, do it, it actually was better at explaining its reasoning. Well, that created two problems. One, it just did what it needed to do, but then two, it capped out. Okay. And it also was not just like, whoa, it's 99% accurate in explaining its chain of thought when we do outcome-based reinforcement versus 20% with human feedback reinforcement. It actually wasn't really all that great. It was like 28% at best. So you're seeing, a notable margin of difference between outcome-based and human feedback reinforcement, but not so much so that you would go, okay, throw the human feedback out. It's just not even worth it. I think what it speaks to is we have to be really conscientious and careful about assuming that, and I have to be careful how I represent this because I say this all the time. I talk about the fact it's important to have humans in the loop. What we have to be really, really careful about, and I think this research reveals this, is that simply putting a human in the loop does not improve the outcome. And we're seeing this in the research of just because you have humans reinforce the learning actually can have negative side effects. It actually can make it worse in explaining its reasoning because it just knows what you want to say. So one, those humans actually have to have clear guardrails and guidance in, well, how do you assess this? Don't just do it off your gut tummy feels. Yeah, that looks like a much better response to me. I feel good about that. No, you actually have to have rigid criteria that people are weighing it against, type of thing. And also, we need to be careful we don't become over reliant on, so any sort of human in the loop, any sort of human feedback naturally is better than not having it. That's actually not true. But we also don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, I think was really my takeaway from this. Now, something else I thought was really interesting in the reward hacking, which if you remember, I talked about what reward hacking was where it would find some sort of exploit in accomplishing its task, which I was going to include it this week, but I didn't. This thing about how AI is like doing some crazy stuff to accomplish its tasks. One of the things that was really interesting is when it does that, when it identifies an exploit, it almost never includes that in its chain of thought. Almost never, less than 2% of the cases in this research. So if it found a cheat, regardless of what that cheat was or how it pulled it off or how it found it, it basically never said it did that. And even when questioned, it didn't. Yet it would find the exploits every time, like 99% of the time. Now, I share this because it just helps you understand how to think about why we need to be so careful with this. 99% of the time, AI will find exploits and hacks to accomplish its task. If there is one, because again, this thing moves so fast, it's so good at pattern recognition, it's so good at figuring out what it needs to do, that it will find, if there's a faster way to do it, a quicker, easier way to do it, it will do it. And it will not tell you it's going to do it. So, what do we take from that is, well, one, I think there's opportunity for us to try and figure out how we do that one. We might have to try and figure out how do we get better at that. I don't know that we can, because again, we're dealing with an AI system that's built on human data, that's made by human people. Humans do this all the time. I've just been in the human performance business long enough to know when people figure out a cheat to the system, it doesn't matter what you do. For the most part, getting it out of them that they're doing it is like pulling teeth. It's very difficult. So is it any surprise? And that's where when people go, oh, AI is so bad. People are the same way. If they find an exploit and they're using an exploit, chances are they're not going to tell you they're using an exploit. They're not going to tell you they found a shortcut, regardless of, even if you ask them directly. So AI, naturally, you would expect is going to do the same thing. The difference is humans are a lot worse at finding these exploits. AI will find them. And this goes back to why going slow to go fast is so important with AI, because if there is a way it can do a better job, better, air quote, accomplish its task more efficiently, more effectively, faster, whatever that reward system is, whatever you're telling it, this is the goal I'm trying to get to. If there's a way it can find a loophole to get that done, it will find it, almost guaranteed. And then it will not tell you that that's what it's doing. So again, this is why we need to think through, okay, one, AI can't really be held accountable. So where exactly are you putting AI into your systems? How are you doing it? How are you overseeing it? How are you making sure there are people in place to be held accountable for what it does? How are you keeping people in at key decision points? Because maybe you won't ever be able to truly understand. I actually don't think we will. To be completely honest, I don't think we're ever going to be able to grasp how AI came to the conclusions that it did. And in some ways, I don't think that's necessarily always a bad thing if we're very careful about what we delegate to it. Okay, I think about that as a people manager. One of the things that I found to be so effective as a people manager is I take the time to get really clear on the outcomes and the parameters of whatever you do, you cannot go outside of these boundary lines. However, within those boundary lines, I'm not going to get in your way. And believe me when I tell you, that will unlock human performance like you've never seen. I think we're going to have to take the same approach to AI. We are going to have to take the time to get crystal clear on what our desired outcome is, crystal clear on, hey, what are the absolute, like we cannot bend around these parameters. There can be no exceptions to this in this area, which all goes back to why you have to have some sort of moral, ethical framework that you build into this stuff. And then from there, we need to be okay saying, AI, do your thing. And then trusting it to do it. And yes, we need to make sure there's people, making sure that it's to the best of our ability, playing inside those boundary lines. But we're going to end up spinning our wheels if we're like, so how do we get it perfect and make sure we fully understand? First of all, it's moving so fast, there's not enough hours in your lifetime, 1,000 times over, to try and make sense of this stuff. And so I just think it's really important. And this research, I would highly encourage anybody to actually go take the time to look at it. It really was fascinating to dig into it. But you have to dig into it with the right perspective, because you could look at this and it could completely freak you the heck out. You might completely just panic and go, oh my gosh, AI is lying to us. It's doing all this stuff. There's nothing we can do. It's just getting ahead of us. And in some ways, yes, that's true, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. I mean, it can. Now, the other thing is this chain of thought only gets worse in terms of its ability to explain things the more complicated and the more advanced we put the AI on. So again, this goes back to, as people are in decision-making roles of where do we put AI? Just recognize the more complex, the more multifaceted, the more advanced types of things you're asking AI to do autonomously, the more likely it is to do this stuff and not be transparent with how it does. So the more clear you need to be on the parameters, the more clear you need to be on the outcomes. I mean, all this stuff, because again, it will find ways to exploit it, and it will do whatever it takes to get to the finish line. Whatever it takes. And you're probably not going to be able to figure out how or why. And auditing it is darn near impossible. I mean, it works in these highly systematized environments, research environments, where the whole purpose of it is to study it. Because you might listen to this whole thing and go, oh yeah, well, if it's so hard, how did they do research on it? Well, yeah, that's in a closed research environment where that is the whole purpose of the exercise. You think about a large corporation where you're just letting AI loose. Are you kidding? There's not teams of researchers following this stuff, making sure that everything is, up to code and all this other stuff. So of course it's going to get lost in the noise. So if nothing else, more reason to be thoughtful, to be intentional, to be really careful in what you do. And if you need help with it, this is why I tell people all the time, look, I'm not always just trying to pitch my wares. I'm trying to say, you need help thinking through these things, because there's corners you're not thinking around. There's things you're not considering. There's risks you're not anticipating. And AI will just continue to exploit that if you are not careful. Okay, there you go. That's the Anthropic research. And now you also better understand why you might be seeing all sorts of headlines right now about reasoning models lying and exaggerating and not being honest and all this other stuff, because the research just came out. All right. Let's jump to another one that I thought was interesting, but not surprising, because it felt very familiar to me as well. There was this big study or survey. I'm always careful how I frame it, because it could be a study, it could be a survey, it could be research, whatever. But they did this thing on, is college affordable? Okay. And the conclusion of it, so if you've seen the headlines or things like this, is that college is becoming too costly for families making $300,000 or less. That's a pretty staggering statistic. I mean, I get why. Kudos to the marketing person who wrote it up that way, because I'm sure it's getting lots of clicks. If for no other reason, then that's a pretty jaw-dropping statistic, that a family can make $300,000 a year and still not be able to send their children to school. Now, I want to break that down, because this hype behind it, I don't think is helpful, in that it can make it seem like, right, this can drive outrage and make people go, college is becoming unaffordable, all this other stuff. Yes and no. So I want to talk about some of the things it's actually talking about. Now, first of all, it's talking about top colleges, right? And when I say top colleges, I'm talking about the names that everybody thinks of when they think of like, ooh, you went to Columbia, to Yale, to Harvard, to Boston University, to Cornell, these kinds of things. All right. We're not talking about University of Illinois, whatever, Urbana, something like that. We're not talking about that. Now, granted, even those schools are becoming further and further out of reach, but I do at least want to ground this, that if you're thinking, and the reason I would call attention to this, okay, just to give some context, I remember before having kids, hearing all these like terrifying statistics about the fact that nobody can afford to have children because it costs X blah, 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 millions of dollars to raise a kid from 0 to 18 or something like that. And it sounds extremely spooky. And I already look at the birth rate and what people are already scared to death to have kids. So then you start throwing around numbers like even families that make 300,000 can't send their kids to college. All right, not accurate at all in terms of what it's saying. Okay, we're talking, might it be more challenging for a family making 300,000 to send your kid to Stanford? I mean, yeah, but it's also not even just can't send them. It has to do with this really difficult thing that's very personal for me because I experienced this. So growing up, when I went off to college, my parents were not, we'll just say, not in a desired position to support me very much financially. So it was like, well, you can go where you want to go, but you're kind of on your own. We'll give you a little bit of support, but that's it. And so for me, that put me in a really, really complicated position because a lot of times, a lot of students, I'm sure anybody listening to this might be familiar with this themselves. You're trying to get financial aid. You're trying to get, scholarships, awards, incentives, things like that to help bring the cost, the out-of-pocket cost down. And unfortunately, if your family makes too much, then the regulations and the guidelines won't allow you to qualify. But then you also don't have enough money to pay the tuition bill either. So you're in this really impossible situation. And this was the situation I found myself in that made it very difficult for me to navigate paying for college because my parents technically made more than qualified me to apply for financial aid and get the kind of support I needed to have some support in helping me pay for school. But they also weren't going to pay for any of it or very little of it. And so it was like, well, now what do I do? Because now I'm kind of stuck. And this is really what this is getting at is now as tuition has blown up and the financial aid criteria really have not adjusted with all of this, you have tons of people who are in this really intense situation where they may have gotten accepted, maybe into their dream school. Maybe they got accepted into UPenn, or maybe you got into Yale. And you're like, sweet, mom and dad, like, great, I qualified, let's do this. And you go through the process and it's like, oh, yeah, you don't qualify for any aid. And maybe you have parents who are super supportive and go, no problem, we'll take a second mortgage on the house to send you to school. Or maybe you have parents like mine that are like, too bad, so sad, like, figure it out. And then you're left kind of going, okay. And this is how people end up with just ridiculous amounts of student loan debt. They get student loans from predatory companies, all this kind of stuff. So you can see where this is becoming really problematic. Now, what I don't appreciate is a lot of times people's response is, college is too expensive, or, people don't need to go to college, or we look for these super simple solutions. And I don't think there's really any simple solution. So my goal in this is just to give some guidance on how to approach some of this stuff. First of all, let me say this. College in general, in my opinion, is not something that people should just universally say, you have to do this. And I say that as somebody who has an undergrad and a graduate degree. I'm a big advocate for higher education. I think there's a lot of value that can come from it. But I don't think this just, well, that's what you do. You finish high school and you go off to college and you get a degree. It's not wise. And it's especially not wise in this day and age where tuition is insane and you have all these other additional complexities and all this other stuff. So Is college a good thing for a lot of people still? Sure. Should you just send people to it? No, I think you should really take the time to go into it. And there's lots of other things that you can explore and examine as possibilities to actually figure out how to do this. Now, the other thing is too, there's this whole idea that if you go to college, you have to go to a top university or you're just screwed. You're done. You got to get into Yale, Stanford, UPenn, UNC, something like that. And if I didn't mention your school, please don't get offended. I'm just rattling some off. But like, you've got to get into one of these big schools or you're doomed. That's also not accurate. Okay. Are there advantages? I'm not going to say that there's not. All right. I have lots of friends and connections who have very much benefited from going to an Ivy League school and building relationships with some of the world's most elite people on the planet. And it's made their life a heck of a lot easier. Okay. You're going to have those stories. I also have lots of friends who are in triple digit, 6-figure debt for school that they couldn't afford to get a degree that didn't add any real meaningful value. And they didn't really make any of those amazing networking relationships because that wasn't really their focus. They just thought getting a degree from the school is going to magically open doors, and it didn't. So even if you decide after critically analyzing this with your children or even for yourself, and you go, I really do feel that college is the right thing, fine. Then look into what are your options? What do you qualify for? All this other stuff. And then from there, decide, do I really need to go to one of these top schools? Because honestly, the number of people I know who pursue these top schools for no reason other than just ego so that they can have a badge on their resume, it's not worth the debt and the headache of what you're dealing with for it. And I can tell you, the people coming out of these schools are not ridiculously more qualified than the ones who aren't. They just aren't. I worked for a company out east where I don't know how many Ivy League students I interviewed for jobs where I was like, there is nothing special about this. So an Ivy League degree does not make a great candidate. So if you want to go to school, you decide it's the right path, you think you're going to go to an Ivy League school, and like, okay, but don't necessarily think that's what you have to do to make things work. Okay. There are plenty of other good schools that will actually pull this together, and you can do it for a fraction of the cost. I know colleges now, you can get your undergrad for $24,000 total. That's not a year. That's total. Okay. So the idea that higher education is out of reach, out of touch for anybody, not the case. Okay. I'm just saying that you can get a higher education degree without paying oodles and oodles of money. All right. But I think the other thing is really examine what are the other alternatives. And it doesn't mean, oh, well, it's either go to school or go into the trades, even though I think the trades are an extremely viable, really valuable path for lots of people to take. I think it's a great path for people to explore and examine. And you can do extremely well in that. And I would just encourage anybody to explore that as a viable option. There's no second class path for it. But I think it's one of those things where it's just like, do the time, take the time to figure it out, see if it's the right school, see if that's even the path you need to take, and then go from there. So is school becoming much more expensive? Yes. Is it becoming much more out of reach for a lot of people? I mean, yeah, in a traditional sense. Does that mean that you can't go to school anymore or you're going to have to sink yourself in debt? No. Should you even be thinking you have to go to college in the first place? No. I know plenty of people who didn't go to school, then they got into a company that was going to reimburse them, then they did it afterwards and it was free type of. I mean, there's lots of different creative ways that you can accomplish it. So one, school's not the only path. Higher education is not the only path. But even if it's the path, you don't have to take the freaking path that this kind of thing pushes that says you've got to do this and it's got to be at this school and it's going to set you back this many $100,000. So you're doomed. Okay. So there you go. There's my honest reaction and thought on this. And again, if you have questions on some of these creative things, reach out. Let me know. I've guided people through some of this stuff many different ways where they thought, here's what I'm really trying to achieve. And it just feels impossible. And through talking it through, it was like, oh, that actually wasn't as impossible as I thought. All right. So the next one, let's talk about this, because one of the biggest problems that people have when it comes to going back to school is this whole idea of, well, okay, what am I going to get a job on the other side? And one of the things I came across was some big research coming out of LinkedIn related to job searches. And let's just say the job market is not great right now. Now, I don't say that to add further anxiety and stress to people who might be looking for a job or in a position where they're out of work, things like that. But just to give you an update on kind of currently where things are. Half of job seekers right now, okay, over 50%, it's taking them more than 6 months to find a job. That's a pretty staggering statistic when you really think about it. So, I mean, there's a lot of people, and I have connections to a lot of people. And I will just say, when my position got eliminated at the end of last year, this was something I was aware of and was really taking into account of what was the next step that I was going to take, was the fact I knew finding a job right now is not the easiest thing to do, at least not in a traditional sense. Now, I bring this up not to, like I said, not to add anxiety, not to fuel the fire of, oh, the end is near, all this other stuff, but to try and bring some calm to it, that if you are out of work right now and you feel like you're banging your head against a wall, you feel like you're not getting where you need to go or anything like that, you're not alone. Okay. You're not alone. Lots of people right now I talk to have been looking and struggling to find things, and they've been sending out hundreds of applications only to never get called. And that sucks. And I really hate that. And I really hate when I work with HR execs and I talk to them about the fact that it's not okay for you to be doing these ghost vacancies where you're just recruiting for positions don't exist, but you're just trying to fill your pipeline. And people are getting excited about possible job opportunities when really these aren't even jobs that exist. They're not planned for it. There's no funded headcount for it. It's literally just empty vacancies designed to bring in pipeline candidates and give the appearance that everything's normal. So I share that insider information. So at least those of you who might be in that category, people who've been looking for a while and feel like you're not going anywhere, you're not alone. You're not crazy. It's not because something's wrong with you. I'm not saying don't do some hard work and look internally and say, hey, is there more I could be doing? Could I be getting creative? Things like that. That's not what I'm saying. There's always opportunity. But what I'm saying is, on the days where it just feels like it's impossible, it's tough right now. It's tough right now. So given that, couple things that I would encourage anybody to consider right now. First of all, one is that honest look in the mirror of, hey, what am I doing? Have I really thought through what it is that I bring to an organization? Have I examined my skills? Am I articulating myself well? Have I created some sort of online presence for myself to give me some sort of credibility in the space of, my sphere of influence? Am I doing those things? Sure. Am I regularly networking with people and seeking out opportunities? Am I doing that kind of work? If not, then sure, do more of that. If you are, then don't get stressed and beat yourself up and things like that. I mean, get feedback from other people and tweak it and adjust it, fine. But always look internally first, because the only thing you can control is yourself. And so the best thing you can do is go, well, are there things I could be doing better? If ultimately you look at it and go, I really am doing what I can, then I think the next thing I would say is it might be an opportunity for you to evaluate. One, is it time for maybe a shift in where I'm working? Now, one of the things that was interesting was LinkedIn had this list of there are certain fields that do not have these long timelines. Sales, program and project management, research, anything in healthcare services. So like the healthcare service industry is booming. And interestingly, human resources is also growing. So maybe you need to reposition your skills, not make a total career shift, but maybe you go, maybe I figure out how to connect my skills to those kinds of jobs, because maybe if I focus my attention in, and maybe you go, I'm not a salesperson. Okay. Maybe you're a sales enablement person. Maybe you're kind of that support function that helps in the post-sales process. Well, you can work in sales without being a frontline salesperson. And I think a lot of times people have this very narrow view of, what that looks like. So if you are frustrated and feel like you're shooting into the dark, maybe focus your attention on some of these. Oh, hey, research is on that list. Maybe I could figure out how I could apply my, analytical skills into a research environment, since that seems to be growing right now. Maybe something in human research, that kind of stuff. Like, figure out how you might be able to research or repurpose your skills into something like that. Now, I won't pretend that that's easy. As somebody who was formerly trained in being a teacher, to suddenly try and jump ship into the corporate world was not an easy step. But this was the journey I went through. I repositioned how understanding human and cognitive psychology and all this other stuff helped me understand human performance and how that translates. It was work, but I was able to do it and go, okay, well, obviously going into the teaching field isn't what I want to do and really is not really the easiest path. So I just repositioned my skills for a different function, a different area of focus. And I think that's another option for people right now. The other one is, as much as I see some of these things where it's like, hey, we're only going to use AI and we're only going to do all this stuff, the whole idea that an internal full-time position is somehow more secure than a independent, contractor consulting position, it's really not holding up anymore. It is just a very vulnerable environment no matter where you are. Now, that's not to say, hey, everybody quit your job and go be a consultant, because that's a challenge in and of itself. Having been working on that diligently since January, I will say it's not exactly an easy path to cut. And this is coming from somebody who has a very large sphere of influence, lots of connections, and a relatively sizable brand around me. So it's no small task to take on, but it is something that I think people can at least start considering. And that may be true even if you're in a full-time employment role right now. I coach people all the time to say, hey, you might want to start building your personal brand and doing some stuff on the side, just even as a security blanket, because even in a corporate role, you're not necessarily secure. So all that to say, there are paths forward. I don't have the universal formula, do this XYZ, do these 5 steps, and this is how you're going to be fine in your career search. No, but these are some guiding principles. And I am also working on a course right now that I'm still got to record and finish out some other things, but that is really talking about how do you be irreplaceable in the AI age? What do you really do? What are some guiding principles? What are some steps that you can walk through to actually help do this evaluation? And I'm largely building this because I see how much of a need it is. And many people are going, I get it. I just don't even know where to start. And my hope is that I can help people at least try and figure out what that looks like. But again, I think the 3 big steps are: 1, look in the mirror, what you're doing. Are there things that you could be doing it differently? 2, do you maybe need to reposition your skills and think about, like, maybe I need to focus and look for full-time jobs in this sector or this industry or this other area that I hadn't really considered before, that is maybe more aligned and is actually growing right now. There are companies that are blowing up all over. So it's not like everybody's just in this recession. It's just about being strategic and where. Or then the third is it maybe time to reconsider your employment options and get creative with what you do? Now, the challenge I will say with that is some people I see, they try and do both. It doesn't always work very well. So just be careful with that. But let's see with the timing. Let me just run down one last thing. That's kind of my concluding thoughts on that, workforce confidence, some of the research coming out of LinkedIn right now on that. The last one was just one where I kind of put my head in my hands again this week. Google is all over the news for their crackdown on return to the office. And it was just, again, one of these things where I'm like, what are you doing? Now, at first, I thought, well, maybe Google didn't perform that well. Maybe they had a really bad year. And this is because whenever this happens, you always see the conspiracy theories of, this is tied to corporate real estate. And, this is the big real estate investors trying to force people back in to renew their contracts and blah, 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 blah. I think that's a factor. Sure. It's absolutely a factor. I don't think it's as much of a smoking gun as a lot of people think. I see the things that it's like, oh, this is just companies are trying to downsize proactively, and they're doing this as a way to force people out rather than actually do the hard work. Yes, that is also a factor. I'm not going to say it's not a factor. But again, I don't think it's the smoking gun that it's often represented to be. I think, really what we're seeing, because the way Google positioned it, which I wrote about it this week, because just the way they said it, that they were like, we've determined that the optimal formula for peak performance is in-office work 60 hours a week. And I seriously just wanted to sit down with who came up with this statistic and let me see the data behind this. I really want to see how you concluded this. Like, I've got a million follow-up questions for what does optimal performance mean? How are you factoring that? How did you determine in-office versus out-of-office? How are you delineating between meaningful activity and useless activity? Does that 60 hours include drive time? Does it include lunches? Is that pure focused work time? So, and it's not that I expect people to always do that level of diligence in this, but when you conclusively state from the stage, in the presses, everything, we have determined this is the formula. That formula better stand up to some real scrutiny. And from what I could determine from digging into this, it wouldn't hold up to any of it. So I do think, so just be careful with that kind of stuff. If you are a leader that is maybe doing more, bringing people back into the office, I'm not an anti-office person. I personally won't participate in it, but I'm not opposed to it. But just be really careful when you make this kind of stuff, because it just makes you look silly. It really does. When you say this kind of stuff from the stage so confidently, you look like a fool when people are like, you didn't do any research to actually validate this. Prove it. And you can't, because you didn't. So don't do that kind of stuff. But I think the part that, is probably a really big factor right now, there is a lot of uncertainty. And if I've seen anything, when things get uncertain, people tend to gravitate towards what they're most comfortable with. I honestly think this is probably more what's going on than anything else. Companies are freaking out a little bit just in general. If you listened last week, leadership trust is at an all-time low. People are freaking out about the implications of tariffs. UPS just slashed a bunch of jobs because they're anticipating nobody's going to order off Amazon anymore. Everybody's just really, really, really nervous. And so you could try and blame those things, or you could go, okay, well, all those things are creating anxiety and uncertainty for people. And when people are anxious and uncertain, they tend to cling to what's most familiar to them. So I fully anticipate a lot of what we're seeing right now is people just feeling really, really unsettled, and bringing people into an office, seeing them working, feeling like when I look around, I feel better about the environment. I feel like it's more certain. I feel more comfortable with it. That can be very, very appealing. And I don't think we always appreciate that a lot of decisions are made that way. So yes, might real estate costs be affecting it? Yeah, sure. Might trying to get, more margins out of things be a factor? I have no doubt it's factoring into that. But let's not ignore the fact that senior executives, CEOs, like all these people, they're humans too. And when things start getting really unsettled and they feel like things are out of control, they gravitate towards what's comfortable to them. And if what's comfortable to them is having a bunch of people nearby that they can look and see and feel comfortable that work is happening, and they say nice things to them and they feel good about their environment, it gives a false sense of security. And I think that's the risk, which actually ties back to the very first point that I made today with reasoning models and human feedback, is it can be very, very deceptive. So reflect back on what I said earlier in the podcast, that humans telling AI, yeah, that is good. I like that. That feels good. It's actually training AI to give the wrong answer in a more confident way. Well, the same is true in an office environment. Yeah, I get if you're a senior leader, you may feel better when people are around and they're making you feel good about the work getting done, and you can see the work happening, and they're telling you they, enjoy being here and thank you for, all that you're doing for this. Yeah, but it actually also may be insidiously rotting at the core and you're not even seeing it. And so you need to be really, really mindful of that. And I think the other advice, the final advice, and then I'll conclude, is to the employees, who may be in a situation where something like this happens. Okay. And I know I've given this advice before, but I know I've got new folks who listen in all the time. Don't panic when this kind of stuff happens. Don't let this hijack your amygdala and send you off the deep end. I get it can be a little scary. Sure. It may sound like this is inevitable. I have seen these things rolled back more times than I can count. Sure, they're offering buyouts and saying you have till this date and then buyout. Don't be the first one to sign that paperwork. Okay, that's just the one thing I will say. Wait as long as humanly possible. If you decide this isn't what I want to do, wait it out, see how it goes. But the other thing is, do what you can to try and encourage the leaders and the people around you to see that things are okay. Reduce their anxiety level. Help them feel comfortable about the environment they're in, because the reality is, I'm telling you, human discomfort and anxiety fuels more of this stuff than most people realize. And nobody wants to talk about it because it's like embarrassing to say, I just want to bring people back into the office because I'm a little insecure. You're not going to hear a CEO or a C-suite exec ever say that from the stage, which is really unfortunate because I wish they would, because then we could actually deal with the problem. But you're never going to hear them say, it just makes me feel bad when I come into an empty office. I feel like I'm failing. Makes me question how valuable I am as a leader. Okay. And if you say, well, Christopher, that's ridiculous. Nobody thinks it. Yeah, they do. And I know because I hear it in coaching sessions all the time. So if you can help reduce the anxiety, if you can help make people feel more calm, they're less likely to make stupid moves like this. And I know last week I was a little hard on employees related to the leadership thing, saying, don't just point your fingers at the leader. Recognize we're in this situation also because of your contributions. The same is true with this. If you are not contributing to helping keep things calm, helping show that, hey, work is still getting done, helping being proactive in doing the things that give people that comfort level in the office, in a non-office environment, you are actually contributing to this problem. And that's just the reality of things. So be aware of it, not that you can fix it, but so that you can be part of the solution instead of, well, you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. There really is no middle ground. So wouldn't you rather be part of the solution? All right. With that, I hope you found this helpful. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we will see you on the other side.